For more on this, let's bring in David Otto Endeley, a defence and counterterrorism expert on Africa. He joins me live from London. David, has this conflict effectively reached a stalemate, or is there the prospect of reviving negotiations?
I think the biggest fear has been that both sides, and I'm talking about the RSF for General Hemeti and the Sudanese armed forces controlled by General al-Burhan, have failed in several occasions to resolve the conflict amicably, some kind of a power sharing mechanism. And it leaves us to the conclusion 1 year after that, both sides are struggling to find a common ground. And that leaves us to what you describe as a stalemate, but not just a stalemate, but more of one of the largest, hunger crises that exists. We're not talking yet about the number of displacements, the destruction that has been done to the social, economic, and cultural fabrics of Sudan. But this is just a war that has been abandoned by the international community because, of course, they are not just taking sides, but some of them are tired of the differences that exist between General Hemeti of the Sudanese armed forces and the rapid support forces of General Hemeti. Both of them cannot still agree 1 year on.
You say that there is a sense that Sudan feels abandoned by the international community. What do you think needs to change there? Is there any particular country that should or can step up to help bring them back to the negotiating table, help them find this common ground? Or is this conflict being overshadowed by other conflicts around the world?
Of course, the world has a very short memory span when it comes to focus on specific conflicts, especially in scenarios where belligerent factors do not agree. We have seen interventions coming from countries like Saudi Arabia, but the biggest issue has been that most of the countries that have intervened have either taken one side or the other. I think what we should be looking at is to have, countries that can be in the middle. I mean, negotiations were proposed by countries like Turkey. Perhaps, that could be accelerated even further. We can see some kind of potential for a joint negotiation strategy whereby it is not just sides that are seen as biased holding talks with one of the, be it the RSF or the Sudanese armed forces. We need to see some kind of a coordinated approach, one that should be led not just by groups that are seen as biased, again, as I mentioned earlier on, but by those who are seen as neutral. But in geopolitics, it does appear very difficult to find someone who could be, portrayed as a neutral party, especially in the case of Sudan.
And just finally, when we talk about the largest global proportion of internally displaced people, remind our international audience of what life is like for the civilians who have been suffering for the past year during this conflict.
I mean, it's unimaginable in terms of the level of destruction people have fled away from. I mean, Khartoum it's a ghost of itself as we speak. People have not just fled across the southern part of the country, which is also affected. It's ignited the Darfur crisis. I mean, the biggest issue has been that more rebel groups, or what they call the militias, have been able to be integrated within the rapid support forces ranks. But then the biggest concern also is that the Sudanese armed forces is now, kind of attracting what has been described as Islamists. So the conflict just keeps getting worse. And this has placed the civilian population in a very, miserable point at this stage. So again, we're having, what used to happen in Darfur being repeated in the case of Khartoum. But not just that, neighboring countries like Chad are experiencing a huge influx of refugees that are coming from this area. So no good news 1 year on, no resolution, no agreement between both parties on how to share power. So the conflict continues. But this is very bad news for the region.
It is indeed, but we do appreciate your analysis and reminding the international community of just what the situation is. David Otto Endeley, thank you for your time live there from London.